I became convinced when I was particularly Education Secretary and then Home Secretary that the importance of religion in our national life is insufficiently thought about, insufficiently discussed, insufficiently considered. And it's critically important for our welfare as a society in a wide variety of different ways that we are able to discuss these things in an informed and positive way. And most important of all, on the basis of proper research and understanding of the society of which we're a part. And that's why when I learnt of the work that Linda and her research teams have been doing, I thought it was a tremendous opportunity to try and get a real level of quality dialogue between the academic research that's being done and the participants in public life in a variety of different ways who are dealing in their day-to-day lives with the consequences of that fact.
We tend to hear only the negatives about religion and social integration in the UK. Religion is a divisive force, religious communities failing to integrate, Muslims making difficulties and erecting barriers, Christians demanding exemptions from equality laws. Religious people seem to keep on emphasising their differences. But I've been studying religions in the UK, in particular localities, for about 30 years now, and, as Linda suggested, also directing this big programme on diasporas, migration and identities. And I think there are a lot of good news stories about religion, migration and integration that it's useful to bear in mind at the beginning of these debates. So there are bad stories too, but let's at least start on a positive footing. I think these good news stories run both ways, from the top down, in terms of how politicians and policy have taken on board the importance of religious identity, but also from the ground up, in terms of how religious groups and individuals have seized the opportunities available to them and been active in local and national initiatives. But whether you welcome it or not, and many people do not, the UK has allowed religious people from many different communities to become agents in national and local life in a way that was perhaps only possible by a small minority of Christian clergy and Jewish leaders in the past. And far from a clunky conception of identity we used to have, these sort of isolated strands of gender, sexuality, race, class, religion, we now have a much better awareness, I think, of the places and times which sometimes are very personally traumatic and socially explosive when different identity markers intersect. No one wants to be identified just by their age or their religion or sexuality. We're all much more complex and multifaceted. Superdiversity was a response to this, heralded as the end of identity politics. We seem to be very far from having a joined-up policy or strategy on these issues. So the challenges are very serious, but I think we should meet them with a sense of confidence, aware of what's already been achieved, and unwilling really to go back on a process in which religious organisations and individuals, as well as secular ones, are now recognised as social actors whose contribution can make a positive difference.
It's always struck me as a little bit odd that for some reason in this country we lost sight of the centrality of religious belief somewhere, I don't know, it was 30 or 40 years ago, and seem to have gone through a tough period where we failed to appreciate its importance. The seeking after truth and an understanding of that, and the extent to which it influences the way in which people run their lives, appears to me to be absolutely central to human existence. Of course, there are some who will take a completely secular view of their own lifespan and of their role on earth. But it's pretty obvious, and you don't have to look around very far, there are very large numbers of people who do look to faith-based interpretations of what they should be doing with their lives as being part of a process of trying to understand their role within our universe. And these groups have a number of very unusual features. Firstly, it brings together extraordinarily diverse people. Now, obviously, some religious groups may be based on ethnicity, but actually the majority of them tend to transcend ethnicity. They transcend cultural groupings, they transcend nationality, they transcend, in many cases, social and class aspects. There's one thing which characterises the rather small worshipping community I belong to in London, is that if you went into the room, you couldn't probably think of any reason why the individuals there present would have any reason to have any interconnection between themselves if it were not for the fact they came to worship on a Sunday morning. And I strongly suspect the same applies in a mosque or a gurdwara or indeed a Hindu temple. I actually think superdiversity has helped enormously. I agree we are now in a superdiverse society. There's been a great argument in which I participated about multiculturalism, a word which has probably acquired a bad name because nobody now really agrees what it means. Certainly as a political philosophy, it has been rather undermined because it was seen as compartmentalising people or groups into particular identities where they then had to be provided with particular things. The state has given up on this now because it's realised that the diversity is now so enormous that it can't cope with it. I think that's rather sensible. So I'm an optimist. It seems to me that we have come through a period where the state has seen the phenomenon of multiculturalism and tried in a funny way to control it by classification, to an acceptance of the huge diversity of the society in which we live. But human beings do have some common characteristics, one of which, I think, is the desire to lead out their lives in peace and an understanding that in a social environment that can only be done by tolerating diverse views. And as long as we can harness that through the context of religious groups, I think, in fact, this country has a very bright future in this context. And I am flattered by the fact, from what we were being told earlier by Kim and Therese, that it seems to be acknowledged that we're a bit ahead of the curve on this than many other European countries. There is here an enormous potential to be unlocked, and the state should facilitate it. Of course it can't control it any more than it's our business controlling how individuals go about their lives. But if we can provide the framework, then I think there's an enormous amount to build on, and it certainly doesn't threaten those of a secular viewpoint one little bit. Indeed, there is ample opportunity, as I've discovered myself over the years, for people of religious views and those who don't have them to cooperate together.
I've always disliked the use of the term multiculturalism because the people who think they like multiculturalism define it as people living together in a multi-ethnic society, fine, and people who dislike it define it as a way of creating segregation. Now, I think you can't actually have a discussion when what you're really doing is defining the terms in such a way that you'll confound your enemy. I think we also need to stop discussion being about politics, where, let me be absolutely frank, I think the left tends to use this debate as a way of creating a new group of victims so it can defend them, and the right tends to use it as a way of creating a threat to the existing order. I think we need to stop all of this kind of thing, be a bit more objective about the way we look at it. Now, how would we do that? Well, I think we need to focus less on religion and religion as a source of disadvantage or discrimination, because then we are constantly having a conversation about who's worst off, when actually that really is not the point. The point is, are there cleavages that mean that different groups of people fare differently or look at society differently? So let me cut straight to chase and say, on superdiversity, what I think we mean by that is a multidimensional diversity, race, religion and gender, all interacting to create different life chances. And on integration, which is a much maligned word, much misused word, I think we should be very simple and very outcome-focused when we think about integration. And the mathematicians, Charles is much better at this than I am, would probably say that perfectly integrated societies are ones in which your life chances and your opportunities and your choices are completely random with respect to your race and religion. That is to say, no one can look at your colour and say you're going to be a doctor or you're a dustman. That's what a perfectly integrated society should be. In a super diverse society, everybody can be what they want, as long as we are able to talk to each other in the same language and treat each other with the same levels of respect and manage our relations in the same way. And that we need some core values to do that. And I think, Dominic and I may have a discussion about this later, our human rights framework gives us the basis of those values. Secondly, there will always be conflicts, and I think we need a negotiating mechanism to do that. At present, we don't have to do that. We don't have that. And I think this is a problem in our society. We tend to do our negotiating through so-called religious leaders. I think it is not an adequate or sufficient mechanism. Religious congregations and people who have faith are not the same thing as religious institutions. The two are related, and the latter can help us work with the former, but they are not the same. Lastly, I think we need institutions, and we need what I call, if you like, a highway code. Not a legal set of strictures, but an understanding which is articulated and set out that helps us work together and helps everybody to understand what the rules are. And in the end, if we don't have that, it's going to be very, very hard for people in a super diverse society to understand the most important thing that keeps us together, which is where does authority come from? If it doesn't come from a tyrant, it must come from our agreement. And we've still got to work out how we get agreement and who decides when we've agreed.
The question to the panel is, I think it's Jonathan Sacks' book, The Home We Build Together, noted that an American jury was thought to become a more diluted, maybe more modern, whereas it became more concentrated and orthodox. Is there any research or indication that religious communities here will become how can I put it, retreat to their core values?
Thinking about these boundaries, categories and labels, it's very much a question about context. So for me, the answer to that question about will they retreat to their core values is one about what actually happens to those religious communities going forward. So I think in an environment where religious communities feel that they can express themselves, where they feel they're not required to be defensive, where they feel there's an opportunity for the expression of identity, there's no reason to suppose that kind of retreat that you're fearing. But I think precisely at times, and we've seen this many times historically, when groups feel threatened, or when the things that are absolutely dear to them and central to them, sacred to them, when those things are violated or transgressed, it's at those times that there is both an outward aggression and sometimes a retreat behind the boundary. So much as we might like to get rid of those boundaries and those labels, they're highly contextual, and they arise at times when we feel threatened. And if I think there are any core common issues, it is that core common issue about that kind of territoriality that we feel when we're part of a group, whatever that group might be. And maybe we don't even know what groups we're part of until those boundaries are threatened.
My question's for Therese. Therese, you spoke about Cameron's speech at the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible. And I'm sorry to introduce myself, I'm Shanaz, and I work for a Muslim NGO. And there's aspects of that speech which were disconcerting to a Muslim audience because he rehashed some of the comments he made about multiculturalism and Muslims at the Munich speech in February of 2009. And I wondered if you'd say something about politicians doing God that perhaps work to the advantage of some faith groups in the UK and to the disadvantage of others.
David Cameron's speech, I'm interested to hear that it was felt to be seen from a Muslim perspective. I mean, what I think David Cameron was saying, and this does tie in with the thing at the end, about integration and host cultures. I mean, the host culture in which we are living today is likely to be markedly different from the host culture, firstly, that existed 100 years ago, and I have no doubt that it is going to be different from the host culture that we will have in 100 years' time. But, and I think this is the point, there is no doubt, and I'm quite happy to affirm it, that the culture we enjoy today is the fruit of what has come before us. And to the extent that that has been built on the necessity of reconciling different beliefs within a largely Christian context, because that is what we largely were, is how we have come to be what we are. And it's one of the reasons, interestingly, that we appear to have become a very attractive place for people of other cultures to come and settle. And the evolutionary process by which we have achieved that, therefore, does have some distinctly Anglican Christian characteristics to it, into which a lot of other things have been added. My Jewish forebears experienced it in the 19th century, and also other religious groups. The process of emancipation and of tolerance is key to our national historical narrative, and we should be very proud of it. And therefore, I do think that that was actually what David Cameron was largely speaking about in his speech, and Christianity clearly plays a very major role in that.
My name is Bob Morris. I come from the Constitution Unit in UCL. A question really directed to Trevor Phillips, who I think was saying that were needed some negotiating arbitral body, which we don't have, and that it shouldn't be a religious body. At the moment, we tend to use the Church of England as a proxy for these kind of relationships. I wonder if I could press him a little bit more about what sort of institution he is thinking of.
What I didn't say was that there should be institutions. I think the word I used, and if I didn't, forgive me, I should have used the word mechanisms. I think we need to find a way of allowing different groups of people to be able, first of all, to understand what it is they want out of the system, out of society, and then secondly, to find a way in which people can be allowed as much freedom as is possible that is consistent with being able to live together in the same small space. And that might mean we need more forums locally. It might mean we need to have some rules of the road about how we negotiate these issues. For example, what local authorities provide and what they don't provide for different ethnic or cultural or religious traditions. And lastly, can I just make a point about this issue of identity and host cultures? One of the reasons, most of my family lives in the United States, and one of the reasons I live here and not in the United States is very, very simple. The United States is an immigrant society, and it is a segregated society. And it is a segregated society because of its particular history. Most of the people who fled to the United States fled to escape societies in which they were not allowed to be what they wanted to be. And the history of that country is communities who have gone to a place that's big enough to give them space to create communities that are exactly as they want to be. And the people next door and next state aren't like them, which is why you can get Utah in the United States. You would never have Utah in this country. We do it in a different way. And one of the beauties, in my view, of the British identity, and I'm not referring to any current debates about anything at all Scottish, but I think one of the beauties of the British identity is that it is a determinedly civic identity. My parents did not have to come and turn themselves into something different to become absolutely British. This is a society which at its heart is absolutely welcoming, because the British identity, weak as it sometimes appears to be, has the virtue of being absolutely capacious and capable of engaging and welcoming and giving a space to anybody.